LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Now listen. It's a fact of life that no matter how balanced you are, how great you handle things, how much love and light you emit, there will always be bumps in the road. Sometimes bumps are arbitrary, but sometimes they're indicative of larger life passages, and love and light will only get you so far. And when you're a kid experiencing passages for the first time, you are a novice passage coper, and you have to find a way to get through. I loved Cub Scouts. It was the best. We had a nice den mother, Mrs. Gowan, who gave us cupcakes at every den meeting. I earned my stripes doing activities I loved. Cooking French toast, swimming laps, doing plays, applying a tourniquet. It was great, and I advanced from bobcat to tiger to wolf to bear. I was like a walking Animal Planet. And then we moved on to Boy Scouts. No big deal, except everything changed. No Mrs. Gowan, no cupcakes. We now had a scout master, and because our scout master, Mr. Hathaway, was a traveling salesman like my dad, he shared his scout master responsibilities with a guy who was like a 30-something poster child for the Hitler Youth. Where Mr. Hathaway was mellow, told fun stories, and loved to laugh, our other scoutmaster, whom I will call Gunter, was loud, gruff, and when giving us any positive reinforcement of any kind, used the phrase, "You're my main man!" In short, it was wretched. We were all prepubescent boys, and why Gunter insisted on constantly bragging to us about his wife's big titties was beyond me. Yes, they were big. Huge, in fact, but my best friend Tony and I were much more interested in how she kept her bleach blonde cotton candy hair to stand up so high. You could drive Gunter's wife through a car wash and that hair wouldn't move. It was quite amazing. Whereas Cub Scout camp had been a nice day camp where you ran around to the woods all day, went swimming, but were home in time to watch the Brady Bunch that night, Boy Scout camp was a whole other monster. We had to pack up for a week and get hauled off deep into the woods. Each troop had its own set of tents around its own campfire. My best friend Tony and I shared one of the very roomy tents, and since we were there for the whole week, we moved in. We created a parlor in the front of our tent for entertaining and slept in the back part. It was lovely. Mr. Hathaway was there for the first half of the week, and we had fun. We were never on time for the morning flag raising. We would sit up at night. Mr. Hathaway would tell us scary stories. One night, when asked about the missing toes on one of his feet, he told us they had been eaten off by rats when he was a prisoner of war in Korea. Later, I told my mother this story, and since Mr. Hathaway was a friend of my folks, she said, "Oh, he's so full of it. He lost his toes when he ran over his foot with the lawnmower." All of us Boy Scouts were at various stages of body development, but one kid from Peru was much further along and loved bragging about it. One night in his tent, somebody dared him to prove it, and Pedro had no problem whipping it out and showing 11 other kids his junk. There was a collective gasp from the group. Pedro had not been lying. Needless to say, the rest of us kept our junk under wraps the rest of the week. On Wednesday, halfway through the week of camp, Mr. Hathaway left and Gunter took over, and our little fun campsite became a Dickensian workhouse, something out of Oliver Twist. It was all work and no play. The rest of the week we were either being told, "You're my main man," or being yelled at for not taking scouting seriously enough. I don't think Gunter knew what to say about the parlor in our tent, so he kept his mouth shut. Not long after, Mr. Hathaway left as our halftime troop leader, and it was the Gunter show full time. One nightmare winter weekend, while roughing it by camping outside in a blizzard, I pretended to be very sick so they would call my mom to pick me up. That was it for me and Boy Scouts. Maybe if they had had cupcakes, I would have stayed. That passage was okay because I could take some control of the situation. Unfortunately, you couldn't resign from awful junior high. You just had to find a way to cope. The junior high school in Urbandale, Iowa looked like a state penitentiary from the outside. The few windows looking over the surrounding woods were 6-inch by 6-foot slits, just enough to keep the inmates awake, but not big enough to encourage daydreaming, vandalism, or, God forbid, escape. This was in sharp contrast to the most pleasant open space configuration we had just left in grade school, where samples of cursive lettering and pictures of smiling teeth covered the multicolored walls. Alas, the carefree years of grade school were most definitely over. My friend Tony was still about 4 feet tall, and I had shot up to over 5 feet, but people still thought I was my mother when I answered the phone. We now had to take naked showers in gym class, and after the show and tell at Boy Scout camp that summer, I was mortified to get undressed in front of anyone. And the worst of it was that our school system was experimenting with a newfangled combined curriculum in which our day consisted of 3 two-hour classes. Looking back, I can't imagine what a horror it must have been for the poor teachers who would get stuck for 2 hours at a time with the same group of miserable, loud, and pimpled bundles of hormones sporting desert boots and feathered hair. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and just getting to school past the little herds of jocks, hicks, and potheads without being taunted was a challenge. Charlie's Angels had just debuted on television and was a phenomenon. In some inspired moment, Tony and I decided we would pretend we were Charlie's Angels, and our assignment was to go undercover day after day at Urbandale Junior High School. Now, since I was blonde, I was Jill Monroe, the role played by Farrah Fawcett Majors, and Tony was Kelly Garrett, played by Jacqueline Smith. We didn't have anybody to be Kate Jackson, so we pretended to keep in contact with Sabrina Duncan, Bosley, and sometimes Charlie through walkie-talkies we carried in our backpacks. On our way into school, we would concoct what our covers were that day and who we would be investigating. The more awful the day was, the more fertile our imaginations were, and we would meet and confer at our lockers and answer the occasional hushed call on our walkie-talkies. There were no cell phones then. Sabrina, it's Chris. Kelly is undercover in math science, and it's not going well. The Willis twins are being awful, and I'm going to shadow them in typing class. Let Bosley and Charlie know, would you? In truth, our imaginations got us through those horrible 2 years. I even discovered that another picked-on kid in our class, Phil Toston, used to pretend he was Elizabeth Montgomery from the show Bewitched. I remember during the 2-hour gym class being on Phil's volleyball team and his showing me how he put spells and hexes on the people to affect the game. Many times it really seemed to work. One of the harassing jocks would leap for the ball and would take a bad fall. I would look over at Phil, who would smile a devilish smile at the revenge his witchcraft had caused. Who knew how many other kids resorted to prime time pretending to get through Urbandale Junior High? Maybe there were more than one set of Charlie's Angels, or Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie, or maybe even a Jane Hathaway from the Beverly Hillbillies. All I knew was this helped us survive the shoves, the name-calling, and got us through to high school. High school had its own set of issues, but they were nothing compared to those 2 years as undercover angels working for Charlie in junior high. As an adult, I've created a terrific life for myself, have a great family and friends, and have no need to retreat from reality like we did back then. Now decades later, I pretty much recognize passages for what they are, something that will eventually pass. Yeah, it's one of the good things about getting older. Been there, done most of that. Still, there's the occasional bad day or week or annoying set of circumstances where I reach into my bag, glance around for suspicious strangers who may be watching, pull out my phone, and in a hushed tone I answer, "Is that you, Bosley?" LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Ba 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 bum.